If you're seeing good results from your search campaigns and you want to extend your reach on the network, dynamic search ads or DSA are a great way to do that. They were designed with expansion in mind. Instead of uploading a list of keywords to the platforms, you're going to provide Google or Microsoft with a website or a list of pages on your website. They're going to analyze the content and use that to match you to relevant user queries around the search network. Obviously, the functionality there is a little bit different, and that means that our campaign setup is going to be a bit different as well. So what I want to run through are a little bit more of the fundamentals about DSA, then we'll go through a campaign setup, and I'll show you a few of the differences about how the targeting options are different and ads are a little bit different, and then we'll close out with some best practices to make sure you're set up for success. So let's start with the biggest question. Why would we use dynamic search ads when we have search campaigns in place? And the answer is the number on your screen. 15% of search queries every day, week, month, year are brand new and have never been seen before on Google. And we can assume that Microsoft also has a similar stat. That means that people are constantly finding new ways to search for things, either finding different solutions to their problems, trying to look for new products that they want, or trying to seek out information in new and different ways, either because they're finding new phrases to use or because they just keep mistyping things and things come out all jarbled with a lot of typos and all that sort of thing. But either way, the fact that there's 15% of brand new search queries that have never been seen before means that there's a lot of potential out there for us to reach beyond our current keyword lists to find these new variants for our campaigns. With standard search campaigns, we as advertisers provide a list of keywords, and then Google or Microsoft will match those to different user queries to make sure that we're showing our ad to users who are searching for things that we have in our keyword lists. It's a very controlled process for the most part, as long as your match types are under control, and even then you might need to have a good number of negative keywords in place. But dynamic search ads can let us go beyond our keyword list to help match to some of those search queries that are maybe a little bit outside of what we currently have set up for keywords, but are still relevant to our company based on a different source of information. And that's your website. So what we'll do is provide our website to Google or Microsoft, and then what they'll do is read the content on our web pages, decide what our pages and our website are about, and then match to relevant user queries trying to find information that's similar to our website. So in the same way we provide a keyword list, instead of that, we would be providing our website, and all of the information on our site is going to be used to derive different themes, categories, and match to the user queries on the platforms. The goal here, like I've said, is to make sure that we're matching to queries beyond the keyword list to help grow our accounts in a smart, concise way. The next question you might have: is DSA right for me? Is DSA right for my business? And to that, I would say there is not a business type that DSA cannot work for. Or simply put, DSA can be used for any type of business that you have. There's not a question about the type of business you're using. It's more a question of, is your website a good fit for dynamic search ads? Because that's what everything is going to queue off of, not really your business model, anything like that. If you can advertise your business on search, DSA is a great option if your website meets a few criteria. And there are 3 specific things that I want you to think about while vetting your site for dynamic search ads. The first is if you have strong supporting content. For DSA to work, you need to have a decent amount of content on your web page. And that doesn't mean text in images. They're almost as if you were creating a social ad post, something like that. The text needs to be on your website so that the search engines can crawl it, read it, and understand what your website is about. So you need to make sure you have a decent amount of content on your site. The information needs to be accurate. This one's pretty much a given, but for different e-commerce solutions or lead generation businesses out there, you need to make sure that the information is accurate so that when somebody is searching and Google or Microsoft matches to your website content, you're not feeding them misinformation because you're either out of stock or you don't do that service anymore, something like that. So make sure that your information is accurate and up to date. And the last piece is to make sure that you have calls to action used regularly throughout your website. The main goal of search advertising is to get somebody to take some sort of action on your website, right? You either want to generate a lead, generate a sale, get a phone call, whatever that may be. And although we typically have conversion rate optimized landing pages in place, that doesn't mean that every page of our website is geared toward calls to action. And they don't necessarily need to be heavily focused. They don't have to be as focused on conversion as our landing pages are, but you need to make sure that there are calls to action sprinkled throughout your website frequently enough that users will know what you want them to do and they'll be able to take the next action. So now that we've gone through why DSA is important, a little bit of background about how it works, and you've determined that you're a good fit for a dynamic search ads campaign, let's go ahead and set one up from start to finish. And I'll cover each of the different pieces that you need to know about how you can target things for dynamic search ads. First things first, let's create a new campaign. For dynamic search ads, you can create a campaign using either the sales, leads, website traffic, or a campaign without a goals guidance. For today, I'm just going to set one up without a goals guidance. We'll then choose a search campaign type. We'll just choose website visits for our objective and click continue. We can give the campaign a name just as a placeholder. And now for networks, I want to exclude the display network because those two things should not mix together. They're very different. So we want to target just the search network. And for now, I'll leave Google Search Partners in place. Now the next step in how you set up a DSA campaign versus a regular search campaign is actually a little bit hidden during this builder process, and it's a little bit frustrating. So come down here to show more settings. And in this third option, you'll see dynamic search ads settings. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up. Here is where we'll tell our campaign how we want to utilize the dynamic search ads targeting options. So the first thing we need to do is enter our domain that we want to advertise using DSA. Next, you can choose the language, which is basically just the language that you want to set up and that your website is in. So for this, I'm just going to leave it as English. And the next piece is one that I want to talk about for a little bit, and it's selecting a targeting source. And there are three different options here. The first and the pre-selected option is to use Google's index of my website. What that means is you're telling Google to please go in, review my website, understand what my pages are about, and that's how it's going to match to different search queries around the web. So with this option, Google is going to look at every single page it can find on the website you entered up here, and it's going to use that to help find search queries. The second option is use URLs from my page feed only. So we actually have an entire separate video about DSA page feeds. Go check that one out. It's going to run you through what a page feed is, but effectively this option is going to be a bit more controlled. This is where you provide Google a list of URLs that you are willing to utilize for DSA campaigns. And let's say you have 20 pages on your website, just for easy math, but you only have 10 that you think are a good fit for DSA, and they're the only ones that you want to use. What you would do is put those in an Excel sheet, upload them into Google, and that's what's called a page feed. And each of those 10 URLs are going to be the only ones that Google will go review and try to utilize the content on them to match to different search queries. The third option down here at the bottom is a combination of the two. Basically saying that you can use both Google's index and your page feed to come up with different targeting options for dynamic search ads. Depending on how you're going to set up different rules, this is honestly the most flexible option and gives you the most range of motion, if you will, as to how many pages you can utilize on Google. And since this is a campaign level setting, we can use different ad groups to target different dynamic targets within our Google index of our site or our dynamic page feed. What I'm going to do for today is just set this up using this third option because I do want to show you the different ways that things can be set up. Obviously, once I did that, you can see that there are a couple of page feeds that I already have set up from that previous video that I mentioned just a little bit ago. So for right now, I'm just going to choose this first one. And that's telling Google that I want to use this page feed to find new queries from based on the URLs in this list. You can add multiple page feeds to your list if you want to. That part is fine. And honestly, I'll just go ahead and leave that there just for the sake of doing it. And what that means is that Google is going to look at the URLs in both of these page feeds as well as its index of my website to come up with DSA targets in my campaign. Once we're finished with this option, there are a number of different other things that you would set up for this campaign, just like a normal search campaign. There's ad schedule, your locations, languages, audiences. You can still layer in audiences as observation layers with dynamic search ads campaigns, just like you would with any other search campaign. So all that is pretty much standard. Then into the budget and bidding section, you can set up your budget, your bidding options, just the way that you normally would. For right now, I'm going to go ahead and just set up a couple of placeholder pieces just to get through this portion of the video. Then down below, you can set up the same ad extensions like you normally would and click Save and Continue. And now we're into ad group targeting. And with DSA campaigns, all of the specific targets that you're going to use, whether it's based on Google's index or your page feeds, are going to live at the ad group level in the exact same way that your keywords live at the ad group level in a regular search ads campaign. So what we're doing now is we're going to choose how we want to determine which pages are going to be used for this specific ad group. And there are 4 main ways that you can do this, and it depends on which setting you chose at the campaign level and how robust your website is as to what's going to pop up. The first option here, unfortunately, says no categories are available for your website. That's because I'm using a placeholder URL that just doesn't have a ton of content on the website. But if you have a website that has lots of different pages on it, Google is actually going to go in, review the content of your website, and break it up into different categories that it sees fit. So maybe on a big box retailer's website, it's going to come up with a lot of different categories that you would almost see like departments in a department store. So there's maybe men's clothing, women's clothing, kids clothing, maybe there's household, toys, shoes. There's lots of different departments in a department store, and Google's going to try to find a lot of these different categories in the same way. So if your website has some good segmentation that Google can come up with through its index crawl of your site, they will show up here, and you'll be able to click this first option and find different categories that you want to use. Unfortunately, we don't have those, so let's go through the other options. And the next one is going to be custom labels from your page feed, and this is the one that it currently has selected and open. So let me hop into the page feed that we had set up from the other video so we can show what this looks like. Here's just one of those page feeds. Again, it's a placeholder URL, so a lot of these URLs are disapproved, but this is the label it's talking about. So when we uploaded this DSA page feed, I added in labels to each of the different URLs, and each of them is segmented by a semicolon in here. So these are Google ads as well as videos. So each of those are treated as different labels, and some of these are just treated as DSA exclude. So I don't want to use those. You can target based on what these labels are, and that's what you would add into the ad group targeting on the other page. So let's say I want to target any page on my website that also has this custom label of videos. I'd hop back into my targeting section, add videos into this custom label field, and then click add. Now this ad group is going to utilize all the videos from my page feed that has a dynamic ad target of the custom label videos. So just to keep this straight, I'm going to name this ad group something that tells me what this targeting option is that I've chosen. Now I'll be able to tell that all of the targeting options in this ad group are utilizing that label of videos for my DSA page feed. If you have additional labels that you want to add, simply do the same thing. You can add in the label, click add, it'll show up over here, and this will operate as an or statement, saying that any dynamic ad target will show up if you're using the videos label or the homepage label or whatever other labels you add in here. Any of these that you would put would be combined just in the way that adding a new keyword to a search ad group means that it'll apply to any of the keywords available in that ad group. For the next targeting option, let's create an entirely new ad group. Now the next targeting option is going to be specific web pages. And for this, there are two basic options you can use. You can either use exact URLs, meaning in this field down here, you can add one URL per line and tell Google these are the only pages I want you to target in this ad group. This is very similar to how you would set up a DSA page feed. And actually before we had page feeds, this is how you would create a list of URLs that were specific that you wanted Google to only look at. So let's say you wanted to target only people to come to your homepage. You could easily set that up by adding the URL in here and adding it as the only targeting option. Now you'll see the dynamic ad target for this ad group is URL equals paidmediapros.com, and that's it. They will only utilize this URL as the dynamic ad target for this ad set. But let's say we don't need to be that specific and we want to get a bit more broad. So let's remove this. The second option is to create rules to target web page. So basically what this means is you can create a contains rule based on either the page URL, a custom label, the page content, or the page title of your website. So for right now, I'm just going to use URL. And let's say we want to target anybody who visits a URL that contains the word category. You'd simply come up here, add category, and click add down here at the bottom. Now, Google is going to use any URL on your website that contains the phrase category as a potential dynamic search ads target. It will not utilize any URLs on your site that does not contain that phrase. But let's say we want to get a little bit fancier with it. Maybe there are two specific things you want in your URL. We can come over here and click this pencil. And now you can click and say that the URL contains category and URL contains, and then you can add in some other text. So let's just say that we also think it needs to contain videos. Now you can click update, and now Google is only going to utilize URLs from your website, from its index of your website, that contain both category and videos in the URL. So you can get really specific with how you want to target different web pages on your website. The last way we can target on DSA campaigns is actually the least specific, and I'm not going to create a new ad group for this, but we can come down here to all web pages. And this one is pretty self-explanatory. If you hover over it, include all pages from your website domain. That means that you can utilize all of the web pages that Google can find through its index of your site to utilize for DSA. So if you're confident that all of the pages on your website are a great fit for DSA and you feel good about it, all you need to do is check this box. It'll show up as all web pages within my website, and that will be your dynamic target for this ad group. This specific type of targeting for DSA, in my mind, is only used in a few instances. First, if your website just doesn't have very many pages, or if you're one of those websites where every quote-unquote page is technically part of a long scrolling home page, this is probably going to be the easiest option for you because there's not actually different web pages on your site. It's all the same page, you just scroll down and hit different benchmarks. This could also be a good fit if you just don't get a lot of traffic to your website and segmenting different targeting options into different ad groups isn't going to net you very much insight. It's just going to segment your data a little bit further. Or this option can be used as a catch-all. Let's say you do have a lot of traffic coming through, you have a number of different pages, a number of different targeting options set up, but you want to make sure that you're capturing the interest of anybody on your website. So maybe you create all of those different ad groups with that more granular targeting, give them very competitive bids in the auction to make sure that you show up, but then you utilize this ad group targeting all web pages on your site, but you give it a very low bid. So you're not paying high CPCs, but you're bringing folks through almost as a catch-all for all of the other search queries that are coming through, just to make sure you're showing up if something might be relevant to the content on your website. Now that we've gone through targeting options, I do want to talk about the last piece of dynamic search ads that are quite a bit different than regular search ads, and that's the ad copy. So let's go ahead and click Save and Continue and head into the next step. Just like with a search campaign, they're going to create this big builder for you to set up your search ads. But in this one, you can tell that this is quite a bit different than what we see for normal search ads because most of the fields are not available for us to edit. With dynamic search ads, the final URL is not something you can control. The final URL is going to be whatever URL Google used to trigger the ad. Whatever it matched to the search query, that's going to be the final URL. In your targeting options, it does matter to some degree which pages you're using. You're basically telling Google or Microsoft that all of these pages can be final URLs for your campaign. So if we set up an ad group that only has the home page as the dynamic target, that means that it will only send people to the home page as the final URL. So make sure that whatever you're using as the dynamic target is not only something that has the right content on it, but it can be used as a landing page because whatever triggers your ad will be the final URL for that ad. Similarly, all of your headlines are going to be dynamically generated by Google or Microsoft. These are going to be done to the best of the platform's ability based on the content that is on your website. In most instances, I see that this headline ends up being some form of meta tag on your website. A lot of times it ends up actually being the page title, but that's not always the case. But right now they only show one headline in this example, but dynamic search ads can use up to 3 headlines just like you would with any other search ad. Although they're only showing one here, any of your headlines can show up with dynamic search ads. But this is, again, something that you do not have control over. Google or Microsoft is going to choose whatever the headline is going to be for your ads. Same thing with the display URL. Usually we have the display URL has to mirror our domain, but we can add in the couple of different paths afterwards. This is again where Google and Microsoft will control that. They will decide what your display URL looks like on your ads. The only portion that we have control over are these 2 descriptions down here. So hopefully you're starting to see the importance of making sure that your ad targets by ad group are a good fit because you need to craft descriptions 1 and 2 to match whatever the final URL and whatever the dynamically generated headlines and display URL are going to be. If you're targeting just your entire website, that's going to be really hard to write compelling descriptions to match any of those URLs that can pop up. Ideally, you can start to find some themes within your website, utilize either the labels or the dynamic targets to come up with different themes for each ad group so you can customize these descriptions and make sure that they are as meaningful as possible to the final URL that you're going to be sending users to. So I'm going to go ahead and add a couple of placeholder descriptions just so we can complete this campaign and see what it looks like. Once you're finished, Google will pop you out into the ad groups so you can see the 2 ad groups that we set up here. But as we talked about, there are basically 2 differences between a dynamic search ads campaign and a regular search campaign. And those are the ads and the keywords. So the first thing is I want to show you when you go look at your ads, this is what they're going to look like. you're going to see the descriptions that we put in place, but then the headline and display URL are going to be just this blue and green placeholder text, and that's what's going to show up. And this is what your ads are going to look like. When you are trying to find what different ad variant is working, all this sort of thing, basically the only things you'll be able to see are the descriptions within your ad. The rest are going to be this blue and green placeholder text. For keywords, I'm actually going to hop into a different account really quick. And here we can see in the keyword section for search keywords, there are no keywords shown in this section. But if you look at search terms, all of the search terms for this campaign are going to show up. So when you're trying to review the search queries, they're going to show up in exactly the same place. But the search keyword section is going to be empty because these were triggered based on the dynamic ad targets. Speaking of dynamic ad targets, I hopped back into the placeholder campaign, and there is a dynamic ad targets section over here where you can review the different dynamic ad targeting that you have set up for your DSA campaign. So if you wanted to change any of your targeting options for DSA, or if you wanted to edit or add new or remove any of the targeting options, this dynamic ad targets is where you would do that once your campaign is already set up. You can also find different search terms available here as well as in the keyword section like we just looked at. And lastly, you can set up negative dynamic ad targets. These are going to be done in the same way that you would for any of the positive dynamic ad targets that you have in the account. So let's just say we have it set up to the campaign level, and then we can utilize the exact URLs or create a specific set of URLs, or we can utilize labels from our page feed, which you'll remember I had one of those was set up as DSA exclude. So I could easily add that here as a label and then add it to the campaign as a negative target. So depending on the targeting option I'm using, whether it's based on labels, URL, or page content contains, or just the all web pages target within the dynamic search ads campaign, I can utilize these labels to prevent Google from showing on certain pages from that page feed. And this negative dynamic ad target will overwrite the potential to utilize that as a landing page and final URL for any of my ads on my website. Now that we've gone through the full setup of the dynamic search ads campaigns, I do want to talk about a couple of best practices for this campaign type. There are a few things we can do to make sure that our dynamic search ad campaigns are set up in the best way possible to give us the best chance of success. The first is to add all of your negative lists, negative keywords, anything like that you have on your other search campaigns to your dynamic search ads campaigns. Treat these exactly like you would any other search campaign. If there's a keyword or a search query that's not right for those, odds are it's not right for dynamic search ads. So don't forget to add your negative keywords that you've already used in your other search campaigns to the dynamic search ads campaigns. Second, add your existing keywords as negatives to your dynamic search ads. This is pretty easy. Just go into your keyword list. You can do this either in the interfaces or in the editors, the offline editors. Export your list of keywords, keep your exact match and phrase match type symbols around them, and upload them into one big negative keyword list and apply that to your dynamic search ads campaigns. What we're doing here is making sure that our dynamic search ads don't cannibalize the search traffic that we would be seeing in our regular search campaigns. Although the platforms say that dynamic search ads won't advertise to keywords that you have elsewhere in your account, my experience and the experience of many other advertisers is that that's just simply not true, unfortunately. To make sure that we're not taking traffic away from our currently existing search campaigns, add all of those keywords as negatives to your dynamic search ads campaigns. Lastly, and we talked about this a little bit during the dynamic target setup, is to make sure that you're excluding low quality pages from your page feed and from your campaign dynamic targets. Don't let people come to your website simply because they somehow match to information that was on your privacy policy or your jobs page, or pages that are just not relevant to drive search traffic to. Maybe they don't have those calls to action that you want on there. Maybe they're just not the right fit, or they're about a different product or service that you're not trying to generate interest in from these dynamic search ads. Make sure that you're only targeting and utilizing the pages that you want to drive users to in your dynamic search ads campaigns. Thanks for watching our video. If you thought it was useful, give us a thumbs up below.
We release a new video at least once a week, so if you want to get notified of when a new one comes out, be sure to subscribe to the Paid Media Pros channel.